Stories shape how we see the world. Voice of Witness is an award-winning oral history nonprofit harnessing the transformative power of storytelling. We work with individuals and communities impacted by injustice, helping them document their lived experiences through oral history, telling their own stories in their own words. In an era of reductive sound bites, we need this kind of nuanced grassroots storytelling to create a more just future. Visit voiceofwitness.org/learn to get involved, check out our workshops, and download tools to support your own project. Join us in building a more connected world, one story at a time.
Hi, I'm Rashmi Sajani, founder of Girls Who Code. Look, I'd consider myself a pretty successful adult woman. I've written books, founded 2 successful nonprofits, and I'm raising 2 incredible kids. But here's the thing. I still wake up wondering, is this it? And if the best years are yet to come, when's that going to start? Join me on My So-Called Midlife, my new podcast with Lemonada Media, where we're building a playbook for navigating midlife, one episode at a time. Each week, I'll chat with extraordinary guests who've transformed their midlife crisis into opportunities for growth and newfound purpose. At some point, we all ask ourselves, is there more to life? I'm here to discover how to thrive in my second act, right alongside you. My So-Called Midlife is out now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Lemonada.
Hey, Good Things listeners. This is Maya Rupert, the host of When We Win, a podcast about women of color who have run for office, defied the odds unfairly stacked against them, and won. Having more women of color in public office is a very good thing, which is why I'm thrilled to present you with our very first episode of When We Win. In this episode, I meet with Mitra Jalali and Cheniqua Johnson from the St. Paul City Council and talk about political authenticity and what it means to them. Enjoy. The future is female. Let Black women lead. Latinas fight, Latinas win. Elect women. Over the last several election cycles, we have seen more and more calls for greater representation in our political leadership. Women, especially women of color, have been called on to run for office by voters who said they were ready for change and ready to vote for them. But the outcome of those races tell a different story. Despite more women of color running in each election cycle, we remain woefully underrepresented in elected office. And the same women candidates that voters beg to run are often still losing those races. And it's no wonder. Our political system, the way we run campaigns, judge campaigns, and talk about their ability to succeed, wasn't designed with women of color in mind. The world in which candidates run for office has transformed so much in recent years. That means we need to change the way we run to elect new types of candidates in a new political world. It's time for a new campaign playbook. That's why I'm talking to some of the most exciting women of color in office today. I'm Maya Rupert. Welcome to When We Win. In each episode, we'll focus on women of color who have won. We'll explore the conventional wisdoms of typical campaigning that they challenged, how that worked for them, and what we can learn from how they won. Authenticity is one of those things that somehow seems to mean everything and nothing in politics. And this is especially true for women of color. When we run, our authenticity is demanded, but it's also placed under a microscope. We're told that we must win the voters in our own community, but that we must also appeal to white voters in order to be taken seriously and make everyone feel like we're being unapologetically ourselves the entire time. And if holding all of this at the same time gets too heavy for a candidate, we question her authenticity and deem her unelectable. This same double bind doesn't exist for white male candidates, largely because we have so many narratives that they can authentically embody. White men can be the plain-spoken truth teller, the erudite wordsmith, the tough and principled war hero. But when it comes to women of color, We have fewer examples. So these candidates are unceremoniously shoved into the few narrow models that we've seen before. And failure to fit within those visions means voters are less likely to find their narratives resonant. Being exactly who you are is a privilege that's only ever afforded to those who have never had to answer the question, who do you think you are? So the yardstick for authenticity has white men as its true zero. But new candidates are ready to change all of that.
I do solemnly swear
to support the constitutions
of the United States of America
and of the state of Minnesota,
and that I would discharge faithfully
the duties devolving upon me
as a city council member.
Congratulations.
On January 9th, 2024, the first all-women city council in St. Paul, Minnesota officially took office. And 6 out of the 7 members are women of color.
For the first time in U.S. history, a majority American city of our size has elected a council, a city council of all women and a supermajority of women of color.
This is a big deal for St. Paul. As recently as 2017, there wasn't a single woman of color on the council.
Let's just say a whole lot of people who were comfortable with majority male, majority white institutions for nearly 170 years of city history are suddenly sharply concerned about representation. My thoughts and prayers are with them in this challenging time.
It's an incredible story. In order to help me tell it today, I'm joined by Mitra Jalali, the council president, and Cheniqua Johnson, a recently elected council member. Mitra is the trailblazer of the council. When the Korean-Iranian organizer won a special election in 2018, she became the second woman of color, the first Asian woman, and the first openly queer person to serve on the council. She was the youngest member of that council, the only renter, and almost certainly the furthest to the left politically. In the 5 years since, she's become a political powerhouse in St. Paul and helped mentor the next generation of women of color in elected office. Cheniqua Johnson is one of the members of that next generation. A Black woman, she was born and raised in Worthington, Minnesota, a small rural town near Minnesota's borders with Iowa and South Dakota. She made history in 2018 when she became the first woman of color ever to run for state representative in that area. She lost that race, but continued to be very involved in politics, moving to the city to work for a who's who of Minnesota politicians. That experience paid off with her election to the St. Paul City Council. Mitra, Cheniqua, welcome to When We Win.
Thank you so much for having us.
I am just incredibly excited to be having this conversation with you. And I want to start off and really just kind of talk a little bit about how you all got elected. You both ran for office for the first time in 2018. Mitra, you were running for city council. Cheniqua, you ran for state rep. But you were running from very different sort of areas. And I want to talk a little bit just about what was it like being women of color running for office from urban and rural communities. How did that play out for you two? I just would love to hear you both speak to those experiences.
It feels like a different lifetime to think about that. I'm Mitra Jalali. This is a really fun podcast experience for me already. I love this. In 2018, I think about like where we were in society, right? And, Donald Trump had been elected president. We felt like we were still in the throes of that. I was working in a congressional office. I was helping constituents with like immigration casework, which was brutal. There were terrible things happening to our constituents under the Trump administration. And there was just this like deep national anger and like sense of injustice and fear. And a special election opened up in the city that I live in and love, St. Paul, and I got just a whole bunch of text messages all at once, like, you should think about running for this seat. I think you should run for this seat. And I just had this sense of, like, just calling and desire to do something in the local conversation in a time where it felt like everything in our national realm was very broken. And so that ended up being a year where a lot of women of color kind of like came into the collective political consciousness at once. Like in the national scene, that is the year that our now Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, like all of those women of color got elected on the national level, and it was a big deal. And then locally, myself, Irene Fernando, and Angela Conley were like 3 women of color that ran. To that point, we just hadn't really seen that many women of color candidates. We'd certainly Ilhan was our state rep and things like that. But it was, that genesis feels clear to me as I look back on it. So that first election for me felt like I was just stepping out as Mitra to define myself in terms of what our St. Paul community cared about. And also like just really wanting to be myself, like just wanting to not hide who I am in terms of like my personality and what I care about and what I'm into, but to really be like very focused on, St. Paul voters need housing stability. They need a community safety system. They need like community-centered economic development. They need like a sustainable, resilient city as we look at climate change. So all of that was like what propelled me into public service. And what was really wild, and this will probably pivot to Cheniqua in a nice way, is when I went through, like I ran again in 2019, I ran again in 2023, just last year. So I have run for this job 3 times in 5 years. Sidebar feels very like worked 3 times as hard for half as much time in the same job type of thing. But like, that's my story. And when a bunch of women of color in the next major cycle also all started running for office, and they were sharing in the group chat, like comments they were getting, reactions they were getting, pushback, backlash, things like that, I felt strangely validated, like 5 years after going through it almost entirely by myself, because I was like, oh, so this is just what people are like. This is just what they're doing to us. Like, you're either too qualified or not qualified enough. You either like look like you were smiling and that's inappropriate, or you weren't smiling and like that was inappropriate. Just all of it. And so like I got a second unexpected wave of empowerment, like being so in this very closely with, the wave of candidates that Cheniqua was a part of, and all that feels very connected and meaningful and personal to me. So that's some of what it was like.
Thank you. And I would love to delve more into some of that text chain and to hear a little bit about the experiences. But Cheniqua, I think that does actually bring us really nicely then to you to talk a little bit about your experience in 2018.
I think, just kind of carrying on with what Council President Jalali had mentioned, one of the things I think is super important about my journey too is that it has just been a little bit of all around the state of Minnesota, as far as just like kind of finding, for me, a lot of times it was finding my political voice. As somebody who was born and raised in rural Minnesota, I often did not talk about politics, not at the dinner table. Like our family voted, but it was kind of like there's an election coming up, but there wasn't really much emphasis, especially on just like running for office. My mom often asks me like, what made you get into politics and why are you doing this work? I think I got into politics really because I genuinely was very baffled by how many people would be like, hey, Cheniqua, where are you from? And I would say, I'm from Worthington, Minnesota. And they would say, where is that? And I'm like, it's a small town, just south of Mankato. And then they would be like, there are Black people there? Wow. And you're just like, okay. And then you go, oh, I'm from I actually represent the East Side. Oh, we're on the East Side in Ward 7. Oh, okay. Where is that? And they're like, oh, the East Side. Wow. And I was like, listen, I'm going to need you to care about our communities because we have work to be done. I'm going to need the wows to stop.
Yes.
You should not be surprised when you come in contact with like one Black person from one community or one area. And then I would recognize, though, in the same breath, right, we just had that conversation, the next minute you'd be making a decision that quite literally easily could harm that same Black person you just had contact with, but you don't feel the need to contact me then. You don't feel the need to invite me then to make a decision with you or to have a conversation with you about the impact it's going to have on my family or on the impact it's going to have on my household. And it felt very stark, like the invitation to political spaces or maybe the lack thereof for people like me with my experience, with my background, my story. But it's like, a lot of this work in politics for me has been about not just like what it feels like in the moment, but the long-term game, and knowing that a lot of policies that are made that impact families like mine were often done without people like us that were at the table. And so that for me has been like a huge part of the journey of the spaces, like even the campaigns that I work on, the elected officials I've come to know and grow to really appreciate. But for sure, when it came down to running on the east side of St. Paul, you find the full circle of just like, wow, I've had these conversations with neighbors in Worthington, just like I've had these conversations with neighbors in Battle Creek and St. Paul. And some of the same concerns that were issued to them, like overall with access to knowing what a local government person does. Like a lot of the questions, people are like, you must have had some really hard questions. And I'm like, a lot of times it was like, well, can you tell me what a city council member does? Because I've never met my council member.
Wow.
When I was in rural Minnesota, it was like, can you tell me, a little bit more about what a state representative does? Because I've also never met my state representative. I think for me, it was transitioning from understanding state government and federal government to understanding that I wanted to advocate and join the fight here in St. Paul around things that were as simple as potholes. Potholes, snow removal, the most loud spoken issues here when we're thinking about just everyday activities in Minnesota. You have to get through, our city still has to function sometimes with several feet of snow. How we get to and from work is really important to the average person. And as a city council member, every decision that I make in that regard impacts the day-to-day lives of people that we currently experience. And, both Mitra and I go right back home to our wards every night. And so we also feel the impacts of what we do. And for me, that's really motivating when it comes to just thinking about what the future looks like and what it hasn't looked like in the past.
Absolutely. And I think you both sort of touched on something, that it's about everyday people. So everyone should feel welcome in our political system. But we know that that is not always true. And I think, Mitra, you sort of indicated that you felt in some ways kind of alone in some of the stuff that you were facing. And it was, knowing other people felt some of those same barriers. Obviously, it's not good, but it's sort of like there's sort of almost solidarity in that, understanding that that's just some of what it means to be a woman of color doing some of this work. I wonder if you all have examples of some of the things that either you heard yourself or someone else came to you with, just examples of the kinds of things that people would say to you or ask of you that you feel like were specifically being posed to you because of your identities, and how that impacted your willingness to keep going with it.
Yeah, like the one I remember the most in 2018 was, she's not like really from here. And I was like, oh, okay, so are we going to like have a conversation about like perpetual foreigner syndrome and like how people treat Asian Americans? Like,
right.
Is that what we're doing in 2018? And like, I was born and raised in Minnesota. I like have this Twin Cities family story and frankly, greater Minnesota family story. I mean, my parents are from Korea and Iran. They like individually found their way to greater Minnesota, and then they found each other, and then they relocated to the Twin Cities. And then I was raised all over Minneapolis and St. Paul in the suburbs, and then back in Minneapolis and back in St. Paul. And it's like, I felt a stark contrast between having like so much connection to this place, but because of how I look, being questioned. And then my opponent and her supporters who were like really pushing this narrative at the time, she was an older white woman. She lived in like a much wealthier part of the ward. She moved here from like Iowa, and she was doing the like, I've been a homeowner here for 20 years. And it was just like such a palpable contrast. And my whole thing was, we're not like doing that anymore in our city. If you live here, you have a stake in whether it works well or not.
Yes.
You should run on your vision and values and what you're willing to do as a council member, not like, I've lived here for 20 years and therefore I get to like have more clout and say. It doesn't mean we shouldn't listen to residents with a very long view of our city, but it certainly means is that we shouldn't exclude people who haven't lived here as long because of their perspective. And we also should not perpetuate like racism in like our criticisms of candidates. So like that's just a 2018 example I can think of, but it's just like,
yeah,
I'm in this place in my career right now where like I feel almost aggressively bored with all that. And I'm just like, anyway, like it's 2023. We're here to do a job. These systems aren't working. Minnesota is a place where the failure of our systems exploded outward in like the most painful way on an international stage in 2020. And, we sent a trifecta to the legislature to like get what needs to be done. And now our city councils look the way they look just coming off this cycle. So I'm saying this to say it used to really like pull at me more. And now I'm like, this is just a pebble in my shoe. Like sometimes a person will say something and it just like stings, but then I'm like, I just flick it off. It doesn't mean those 1,000 paper cuts aren't there, but I have had to just forge ahead because like, we just don't have time for that anymore. And if you stop and address every single thing, like you would never get anything done. So it's always this tension between, no, I am going to like call out how this isn't right for our culture and we deserve better. But also there's times where like derailing the work from that is not the right move either. It's always that balance that I feel like I've had to forge. So yeah.
And I found it really interesting to see just how people have, or they assume based off of what they were doing at my age, that somehow that means that I'm doing the same thing. I'm 28 years old, and the amount of times that I hear people at the door be like, when I was 28, I wasn't doing X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, that's you. That's not me.
Yes.
You're in this space where you're talking to people at times, like it just feels like they assume based off of your age that somehow you are less qualified than the person who's twice your age. And it's such a interesting example of hypocrisy when you're not understanding that a lot of the young people that are in our current political system are often the people running campaigns. They are often the people getting hired to write the legislation, advocate for the bills at every level of government. They are the people on Capitol Hill. And I know that because, I am that person. I am that person who's been able to do that work. And you find that sometimes people may assume your lived experience for you. And I feel like that is, everything that's happened that Mitra gave in that example in 2018, 100% happened to me on the campaign trail in 2023. My predecessor we did the math 3 times my age, and just thinking about the changing of what that looks like and the transition of leadership between it. And then in addition to that, I'm also like the youngest council member that was elected in Ward 7 by like 20 years plus, including the people who came before her. So when you just think about like how the faces are changing, it's important to also understand that Ward 7 had almost a third of the population under the age of 35. So when we think about representation and just people that, that piece is often used, I think, against people, I started to see things like in campaign ads that for my opponents that were like, she's the mature choice. What does that mean?
So subtle. I love the subtlety. Yes. Wow.
So, somehow you're just like, how?
Absolutely. So I wanted to hear some of those stories specifically, and I appreciate both of you for sharing them because it's incredibly generous, but also, Mitra, to the point you were making, I completely agree. This is the kind of stuff that we have to say, it's not worth it to address every single incident. But I do think it's so important for people who are hearing the story about this historic all-woman city council right now to know that it didn't happen without some of those things. It happened in spite of those things, right? So I appreciate these stories because I think they say a lot about the resilience of when we're successful, this kind of stuff still happens, but people are resilient enough to move past it. So I really do appreciate those stories. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more on When We Win.
Interested in the power of first-person storytelling? The Voice of Witness book series documents the oral histories of people directly impacted by and fighting against injustice. Each collection supports historically excluded communities to tell their own stories in their own words. The books feature a diversity of voices, including those of refugees and immigrants, incarcerated people, communities displaced from public housing, farm workers, indigenous peoples, and more. These powerful stories highlight crucial issues and expose the impacts of harmful narratives and policies, laying the groundwork to build solidarity and movements for change. Voice of Witness books are read and used by thousands of educators, organizations, and advocates across the country each year. Visit voiceofwitness.org/read to learn more, access free resources, and get involved.
Want a sneak preview of hot new audiobooks? Then check out Your Next Listen, a new podcast from Lemonada Media and Simon & Schuster Audio. We've got everything: the hottest new thrillers, best-selling celebrity memoirs, and swoony romances.
And these aren't tiny clips either. They're entire chapters you can listen to. Your Next Listen is out November 11th, wherever you get your podcasts.
I wonder if we could talk a little bit about kind of something more forward-looking. I'd love to hear a little about the coalition of people that elected you all, because I think this is the future of politics, especially representational politics. We need to bring together coalitions of people who share our identities and people who don't, right? And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you did that kind of organizing, and specifically, was there pressure to sort of message differently in different parts of the ward or different part, right? Was there this sense of, okay, that might work with these people, but you're going to need to say something different here? And especially for two people who just talked about wanting to run as who you are, wanting to be, sort of really embracing that sort of authenticity. How did you resolve that? Do I have to be a different person for different audiences?
Where my mind went, Maya, when you asked me that, like, I have this powerful memory of, like, I think it was like 3 days before the election, and we were all more tired than ever. I just got like a little iPhone memory that was like, remember this day when you looked like absolute garbage and hadn't showered? And I was like, oh, it's giving 3 days before election day. But like, we basically, like, we had a united door knock for all of the endorsed candidates. And so that was like our whole squad and all these different campaigns for school board. And it was like the most diverse and left-leaning class of candidate leaders in like city history. And we packed out this rec center in St. Paul, and it felt like everybody and their mother was there. Like, campaigns from all the different, like, St. Paul constituencies, very young group of people. People brought their children. There's videos of, like, the mayor was playing basketball with our state rep and with me and with another candidate. And we're just, like, hooping it up, waiting for the door knock to start. I think Nelsie's campaign brought, like, egg rolls, and there was tons of, like, Hmong food. And so there was all this, like, there was food, there was community. And we had this amazing, like, little pep rally in a city gym. And it just was this feeling of like, this is our community. Like, our community is in this room. These are the folks who fight for us at the Capitol. Yeah. These are the people who, like, organize the backyard barbecues. These are the people who, like, run our churches. And what we're going to do today is do a massive citywide door knock where we probably move, like, I don't know. I feel like we must have hit 10,000 doors that day. Like, it was so many people in all the wards. And the photo of it it made me, like, wildly emotional, because at that point in the race, we were up against, like, very serious outside spending from mostly, like, out of city interests, like a PAC that was put together by some more conservative labor unions, the, like, real estate blob of organized money, different corporate financial interests, right? And they were like, they were just trying it, like, in every way. And I was like, anyway, like, our community's in this room right now, and this is what St. Paul is like. Our mayor plays basketball with, like, children, and we feed each other, and we have each other's back. And so that was like a day that I remember really clearly, where I was like, the coalition is in this room. It's like our labor folks, it's our faith allies, it's honestly so many people that aren't part of an organization. They're just, like, people. They're like, I care, and I'm a voter, and I'm in this campaign because I'm really excited about, like, Cheniqua or Sarah, or, like, I really want Wajong to be my council member. And, like, I'm just here because I like it. Like, politics is really fun. If you create a culture of joy and, like, nourishment, people go there because they're like, this feels like home. This feels like community. So I just keep thinking about the Linwood Rec Center citywide door knock. Like, to me, that was the coalition.
Amazing.
So, I don't know. We were really feeling ourselves. But because we were, like, fighting for our lives, I was like, go away. Stop. Like, one candidate in our crew had, like, 6 different mailers get mailed against her. And it was, like, outside expenditures, to be clear. Right. And I was like, cool, you're going to get 7 pieces of paper from this one candidate, or on behalf of this one candidate. But Sarah's been to your door probably at least 4 times by now. Like, we are working our asses off. So that's, to me, the coalition. It's leaders that were like, I'm all in. and doing this hand in hand with community. And then like our whole ecosystem kind of putting their arms around us to be like, yeah, this is St. Paul.
There was a bit of a shift this cycle as well. I was directly in it, but I also was watching from, I would say, on the outside in when it comes to just how folks were reacting to politics. Like as somebody who enjoys watching the electorate and like how, how do people vote? What are some things that they're voting on? And I felt like to change myself this election cycle or to alter the things that I really felt at the core of my, value system, my political spectrum, just to alter my responses and questions would take away their ability to choose the direction they wanted to head. And then would also mean that I would be doing that for the next 4 years. And so as somebody who had also ran, in an area where I did not personally feel like I could be always, as open about my political viewpoints in 2018, I was further left than we were campaigning. And in questions, there would be times where I would be like, oh, your campaign manager is acting in your best interest by telling you this is how you should speak. This is just some of the things that you should talk about. And it was because we were in a very predominantly conservative House district that had not voted for a Democrat ever. And that also was predominantly, more moderate leaning conservative Republican. And so you find that change when you're in an area where on the east side of St. Paul, I genuinely in my ward feel like a lot of times our ward continues to vocalize their values and their thoughts. And often it's in alignment with voting for things like rent stabilization. Ward 7 continues to vocalize that. The issue is that they hadn't always had the representation that they needed to continue to further that, at least from a voice on the council. And so when you're just looking at what that means for politics moving forward and what that means for our city, I think it's, when we are grassroots organizing, when we're talking to everyday people, when everyday people are voting, they're electing candidates that look like Mitra. They're electing candidates that look like me. That look like our council. They're young progressive leaders in both cities. And so that says something too, I think, about the hearts of the voters too, and how my coalition on the east side was intentionally made up of people who often did not get centered in political spheres at all. We were in apartment buildings. We were talking to renters. We were talking to homeowners, but we weren't just knocking on their door, asking for their vote. We were also asking them about the issues that they cared about and why, they had or had not been voting in the past. Most of my campaign staff, we were under the age of 40. We were knocking on doors with people who had lived there for 30 years because we have Eastsiders who grew up here, who were born and raised here. And then we had Eastsiders like me too, who had moved here within the last 5 years, folks that didn't even know that there was an election. And so you come in contact with a lot of different people, a lot of different voices, priorities. So if you personally shape or change up who you were, I felt like that would be doing a disservice to the people who were electing me. Because ultimately, it was like interviewing for the job for a year and a half. But every time, if your responses were different, that's actually the type of leadership I felt like we had, and it wasn't working. Maybe it was working for some people, but it wasn't working for me. And I found that a lot of people would talk about just how they were pigeonholed in like having to do that constantly. And I remembered when Mitra was there years before my run, and she reminded me that if you run a campaign running as somebody else other than yourself, if you get elected, that's what people are going to expect you to be. And so I did not want to continue to have that hold over me. Like, I get to lead now as a city council member in a way that I can do my best and ensure that like I'm representing what I campaigned on. So when people are like, what are your issues? And I'm like, the same thing I campaigned on. Housing, we got jobs, services. They are still written on my website. We have not edited it since I got elected because we don't need to. I don't feel sorry for the things that I've been able to, write in newspapers and ads and in quotes. I'm not saying anything new because there isn't that nothing has changed after Election Day. And so that for me feels really amazing. And also being that the opposition was so loud and they didn't come out on top, it gives an opportunity to just simply say that the people spoke in my ward and in many wards across the city. And that's why the women are elected. That's why they're standing here today. And we had people that were not in agreement with what we were doing, but the majority was in every case. And so just to be in that space to say that and to be able to be like, people elected what I ran on, and I ran it as myself, and we'll work really hard to make sure that I lead like myself, because that's what got me here in the first place.
Okay, sit tight, everybody. We're going to take one more quick break, but we'll be right back with more.
Hi, I'm Emily Deschanel.
And I'm Carla Gallo, and we're excited to tell you about Boneheads, our new Bones rewatch podcast.
I played Dr. Temperance Brennan.
And I played Daisy Wick, and we are going to watch from the very beginning.
We're going to watch the episodes. We're going to reminisce. We're going to laugh. We're going to cry. We're going to tell behind-the-scenes stories.
We're going to go on tangents.
A lot of tangents.
So whether you're a seasoned Bones fanatic or a newcomer looking to dip your toes into the wild world of forensic anthropology, this show is for you.
Boneheads from Lemonada Media is out now wherever you get your podcasts.
Want more from your favorite Lemonada Media podcasts while supporting the shows that help make life suck less? Subscribe to Lemonada Premium today. As a subscriber, you'll unlock exclusive bonus content like never-before-heard interviews, behind-the-scenes moments, bonus episodes, and so much more. It's easy to sign up no matter what podcast app you use. On Apple, you can just click the Lemonada logo in the Apple Podcast app and hit subscribe. For all other podcast apps, head to lemonada.supportingcast.fm to subscribe. That's lemonada.supportingcast.fm.
I love to hear you talk about the relationship that you two have had, both as you were running and even now. And I wonder, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I mean, you know, it feels like Mitra has sort of taken on this mentor role. And I wonder from both of your perspectives, Cheniqua, what does that mean to you? Are you able to, in those moments, come and talk to her? And what has that meant for you? And Mitra, I wonder how that has been. I mean, I know that's an extra, role that it feels like you've played, not just with Cheniqua, but a number of women of color who are either in office now or seeking office. And I wonder how that has impacted, what you're doing. And is that something that you want to continue?
Cheniqua, you want to go?
Yeah, I'm like, Mitra's my friend. And just being real, it's like, as a new person, as a woman of color, I'm constantly thinking about how is this person perceiving me? What is this, like, how are we being, there was a, not to elevate this comment, but literally someone being like, oh, they're scowling at each other. They're just looking for little nitpicky things and pictures that you're just like, that makes no sense. But that's the world that we live in. A lot of times women don't run for office because they feel like everything they're going to be doing is under a scope or under a microscopic lens. And I feel like having Mitra be the council president here in St. Paul for me, and I was explaining this to just a grouping that asked us about, like, what is it like working with your friend? It's like, it's really in a situation where I know at the end of the day, I can assume best intentions from her. So there may not always be things that I agree with. Maybe we don't always see eye to eye on an issue. Maybe we will vote differently somehow or sometime. That's not the point. The point is I know that she's going to act in the best interest for the city of St. Paul. But I don't shy away from the fact that for me, this work has been a lot of times working with people that you never know where they're going to end up. Yeah, I didn't become Mitra's friend because I thought she'd be council president one day. I became her coworker first when I was working for then Congressman Keith Ellison. We basically have had just a journey to really get to know each other's values first, not just about elections, not just about campaigning. And I have had the benefit of being able to do that across the spectrum. And so for me, that has been really helpful just in learning the basics of this job. Like, I think when we're looking at it, we're making different news headlines. People are interviewing us. We're having these conversations. I hope that they go really far. And I hope that people don't expect us to come and save the world in 4 years, because we didn't break it. I hope that people aren't like having these really huge goals for us, and that they can understand that we too are human, that we are like literally in a space where we are 7 women, trying to make a difference in housing and economic development and climate justice work. And we recognize that these systems are centuries long. And so friendship or relationships is like a small piece of it that just takes away that ease of like, hey, how's my makeup today? Do I have something stuck in the middle of my teeth while I take this camera picture that now I'm going to be seeing circulated multiple times?
And Mitra, what about you? Is that what does that mean for you, particularly as someone who maybe didn't have that same relationship with someone as you were coming up?
I've definitely been reflecting on this a lot. I guess I think about like not having mentors for most of my career that really shared my life experiences, like all of them. Not like we have nothing in common, but like, you know, I either had mentors who were like white women or white men or men of color. Like never just, okay, that I now have a like woman of color who's older than me and has my similar like personality and whatever. So like I've cobbled together what I've learned from so many other leaders who I am a product of like all of that mentorship. And suddenly to be like what I didn't have to other people has been just an interesting thing I've been unpacking. And one of the things I think about all the time is like, I do think the mentorship goes both ways. I do think that having my collection of leaders that I'm in this with, they're always like shoring me up. I am scared a lot of the time in this job and in this work and in this leadership journey. Like I do a lot of things while being actively like afraid or stressed out or just like worried. And to like look into the eyes of my peers, my mentees, mentors, whatever, and just be like, okay, these women are like reaffirming that I'm on the right track with this. And they are like my compass and they're my energy and like they're my representation. Honestly, like Cheniqua is representation for me. I am always watching her speak and I'm like, just so like my reactions are so visceral to just the way that she is like putting down what needs to be said. And I just like have to kind of keep it together because I feel like I'm going to just light a trash can on fire and like throw it through a bank window. Like, you know, it's just like, I get like these wild, like emotional reactions because I'm getting something for the first time that like I haven't gotten to have. So it like went in reverse for me where I just was like, fine, I'm just going to do this because this is like what's in my heart. And then it created all this like representation around me that's reflected back at me. And that's been like very profound to reflect on. And I just get a lot of affirmation because I do think that this experience of public leadership can feel a lot like what I talked about, like people chipping away at you or like your own anxiety, like sapping you from within. And like, I am constantly blessed with just my girls who are like, hey, did you know you are the baddest in the game? Like I will just get random, unfettered kindness and compliments. And it's so meaningful to me. And like, I just like soak it up because it's everything. Because most of the time in this work, you're experiencing like criticism or scrutiny or someone being negative or something not going well, or like you have to kind of like untangle some wires, or it's just something. It's always something. And I also know that if Cheniqua comes to me and she's like, hey, I hate this, like she will say that. We have enough trust for her to just be that honest with me. And then I'm like, tell me more. And we just figure it out. And like, that's what so much of this work is. It's just figuring it out together, but you have to be able to have the safety and the trust and honesty to grapple with all of it. We each represent 46,000 people. Like every single one of us as leaders now are in a public role with public responsibility. So I'm working to hold all that across the group and to make sure that I don't lose sight of myself and that I'm not like, my therapist said to me, we're going to show up for Mitra the same way she shows up for everyone else. And like, how dare she? Like, who authorized her? Just, I beg your pardon? So like, that is some of my 2024 mood board. So yeah.
I don't have words for how that just made me feel, that conversation between the two of you. I think it is so... It's incredibly inspiring. It's incredibly meaningful. I think it is a big part of what we get when we get women of color in office, because we get told over and over again that politics is sort of zero sum. It's a competition, and we don't hear about this piece nearly enough, but it is the reason people are able to deliver for their constituents. And I'm just, thank you for sharing that. I wanted to get to one additional question that you both kind of alluded to. And I think, again, this is one of these double binds that I think that as women of color, and especially progressive women of color, comes up a lot. And it's basically that, there is the desire, you all ran on this, and you very clearly, it's your values. You want to deliver for your people. You want to deliver for people who've been marginalized. But there's also an understanding that none of this stuff can happen overnight. And I think sometimes there is this thought of, great, you all got in, go fix all the problems. And over 4 years, we can't undo huge systemic issues of systemic disenfranchisement and all of the issues that need to be undone to meaningfully change things. So how do you deal with that sort of, you want to deliver for people, you want it to happen quickly, but you recognize that the systems are what they are. How do you two sort of deal with that? How do you resolve it? How do you talk about it?
I think this is like a huge mental focus of mine right now, looking out over this new council and being like newly elected as the council president, right, is just how are we showing people where we're going together? And there's a lot of power in what Cheniqua just said, which is like, yeah, the pressure is on us to undo all of this in 4 years, but like we didn't break this. So I think it's about holding that relationship with the communities that elected you and developing a first-year governing plan together, a second-year governing plan, like really just maintaining that so that it's not like, okay, we elected you and we're sending you off to City Hall now and you're going to like, be a vending machine. There's like the vending machine gym membership kind of analogies that come up in my mind, right? It's like, you don't just like buy a gym membership and then your body like changes over time. You like go to the gym and like work on yourself. And some people think it's more like, I just want to put my quarter in and get out like the candy bar I picked. And like, that's not how this works. And those are kind of crude analogies, but that's just like something I've heard over the years that stays in my mind. And
I think those are great. I haven't heard them. I think that's such a great way to talk about it.
It's like, we want to be different, right? We don't want to be transactional. We don't want to be entirely relational because outcomes matter, but we're holding all that. We're holding all that toward the platform that we ran on.
Right.
And when you think about just like the expectations and what can be done in 4 years, a lot of work can be done, but also the reality is like eventually there will be someone else in this seat. And so just thinking about how I, from the day I got elected, and I think just in any position that I occupy, I've really taken that mindset of the timing that I'm here is up to the people of my community. But while I'm here, I can set the groundwork and the steps and put steps in place that can have lasting impacts for generations forward. And so it's like walking that balance between knowing you're not going to be able to undo everything that people have done, but also knowing that you can participate in like even the little things that transform or hopefully shift an entire neighborhood in the future.
Right. I think that's incredibly important. And I've got to just say, I am so excited for your leadership, for this entire city council, for your futures. I feel so inspired hearing from you both and just knowing you're out there and working. And I'm just really rooting for you. And I hope you all feel that, especially on the days when it's hard, especially when people think that you can undo systems overnight single-handedly. I hope you feel a little extra strength and know that I'm thinking of you both. I'm so grateful we got a chance to have this conversation. And thank you. I feel like you guys have very generously shared a lot of these stories. And I think that's really important. So thank you very truly for doing this.
Thank you for thinking of us and like rooting us on. We are, we're in a moment, and I feel both excited and anxious. And also I just think of like the times I've served our community through in the last 5 years and how they've absolutely been like some of the most painful experiences of my life. But then the other side of that is like, look at this group of leaders that St. Paul chose to say, we're going to trust you. And it doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything, but we are like entrusting you with directing our city forward. And I just feel so lucky to get to do this work and to get to do it with Cheniqua and with all of my colleagues. And I love this particular combination choice for a podcast because I was like, hey, best friend, do you want to be on a podcast with me? It's really cool. It's with Maya Rupert. It's a national organization. They really like us. It was just like fun. It's just fun. You have to enjoy the fun parts.
Good. Yes. Mitra, Cheniqua, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for thinking of us.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.
When Mitra first ran for office, she didn't see herself reflected in her political mentors. Now she is that reflection for Cheniqua and the rest of the city council she presides over. These women have created an environment where women of color will feel more comfortable running authentically as themselves. One of the most dangerous pieces of conventional wisdom for women of color in politics is that because it's a competition, it has to be zero-sum. If you win, I lose. But that's not true for us. We have to operate from abundance because we all benefit when there are more of us. Try this. Close your eyes. Now think of the word presidential. What image comes to mind? With precisely one exception, our historical collective answer to that question has been a white man. This means we don't have to stretch credibility to see another one in office. When a white man runs, I can see him in office and others like him. It strikes me as real, as authentic. But here's another thing that struck me as I was talking to Mitra and Cheniqua. Now when I close my eyes, I can see them too, and their colleagues, and so many more women of color who are winning, some of whom I'll get a chance to talk to on this show. And soon, our imaginations will expand so that we'll have so many visions of women of color in office that when another one runs, regardless of her background, her experience can resonate with voters as an authentic narrative. We'll be able to see her in office because we'll have seen people like her in office. That'll be the legacy of moments like this one in St. Paul. That'll be the cycle we build when we win. There's more of When We Win on Lemonada Premium. Subscribers get exclusive access to bonus content that includes more ways you can support women candidates of color in local and national elections. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts. When We Win is a Lemonada original. I'm your host, Maya Rupert. This series is presented by Ms. Foundation for Women and by the Marguerite Casey Foundation. When We Win is produced by Tony Williams. Our supervising producer is Jamila Zara Williams. Mixing and sound design by Noah Smith. Jackie Danziger is our vice president of narrative content. Executive producers are Stephanie Whittles-Wax, Jessica Cordova-Kramer, and me, Maya Rupert. Help others find our show by leaving us a rating and writing a review. You can follow me on IG at maya.rupert and Lemonada at Lemonada Media across all social platforms. Follow When We Win wherever you get your podcasts and listen ad-free on Amazon Music with your Prime membership. Thanks so much for listening. See you next week.
Are you looking for ways to make your everyday life happier, healthier, more productive, and more creative? I'm Gretchen Rubin, the #1 best-selling author of The Happiness Project, bringing you fresh insights and practical solutions in the Happier with Gretchen Rubin podcast. My co-host and happiness guinea pig is my sister, Elizabeth Kraft.
That's me, Elizabeth Kraft, a TV writer and producer in Hollywood. Join us as we explore ideas and hacks about cultivating happiness and good habits.
Check out Happier with Gretchen Rubin from Lemonada Media.
Hi, everyone. Gloria Riviera here, and we are back for another season of No One Is Coming to Save Us, a podcast about America's childcare crisis. This season, we're delving deep into 5 critical issues facing our country through the lens of childcare: poverty, mental health, housing, climate change, and the public school system. By exploring these connections, we aim to highlight that childcare is not an isolated issue, but one that influences all facets of American life. Season 4 of No One Is Coming to Save Us is out now wherever you get your podcasts.